All right, fantastic. Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to chat today. If you see me squint a little bit, it's because the lights are really strong right in our eyes. But as Jennifer mentioned, my name's Joel Cherkis. I look after the worldwide government business for Microsoft. And what that means from my perspective is every day we talk with governmental organizations, both at the central government level, but also in the local and regional government space. We talk every day around the challenges within government and the role that technology can play in certain circumstances to solve some of those challenges. Part of the reason that Microsoft is here from a smart city perspective is there is a conversation or a dialogue that is occurring every day. And it's coming very heavily from the city perspective as more people move into the cities, as this urbanization model continues to occur. Now, as part of that, we've actually seen this dramatic implementation or this dramatic shift of how data is looked at within organizations. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and I've done a lot of work with the U.S. federal government and the state and local governments, and for the past 5 years with Microsoft from a global perspective. And one of the common themes that we hear when we talk with governmental organizations is the concept of how the government can better engage with citizens and the private sector utilizing the assets that they have. And one of the key assets that they typically are beginning to exploit is data. And when I say exploit, they're using the data to make the government process a better process. And there are typically a couple of very key areas where they're spending their time. The first typically, at least the areas where we see a lot of traction, are around transparency in government. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the breadth that we're seeing from a transparency perspective, from a legal perspective and from a policy perspective. But the reality is, as this transparency model, or the goals of transparency continue to grow from governments around the world, we're seeing governments do things like publish open data sets that can be utilized for a variety of reasons. In some cases, we see public engagement or citizens building applications. We see the academic research or the academic models where there are things like hackathons and datathons. I was recently with a government performance officer for a large city, and his comment was he wanted to create an analyticathon, where he wanted to actually take this concept of having a group participation to solve some of the challenges. And the challenges weren't things like, how do I reduce crime? They were questions like, how do I make my city a safer city? Or how do I help citizens feel that they are in a safer city? And there are a lot of different variables that are at play. And as I stated earlier, we understand there is a role of technology in some capacity to get to that point. But transparency is a very big part of it. The next phase typically revolves around, or the next model revolves around civic engagement. And this is how governments are interacting with the citizens and the people within the cities. So citizen involvement will typically be things like requests to the city for services, or citizens that are taking advantage of some of the open data so that they can provide services to themselves or services to those that they care about. And these could be things like being able to look at transportation schedules, know when the next bus is arriving or the next train is arriving, and overlaying data on top of that with things like crime data or weather data to realize whether it's appropriate for me to be standing in a public area waiting for public transportation, or whether I should take shelter inside of a building, or if I should wait for the transportation service to arrive before I step outside. These are very simple concepts, and they're being executed in a variety of ways in cities around the world. The last thing that we're seeing is this concept of governments trying to use the data to become better at the government process. So they want to learn from what information they have. And there are a variety of different tools that enable that to happen. And in the past, it required usually some sort of data scientist with somebody doing some semantic modeling process, a lot of times some very heavy computing processing. And what we've seen is that everybody now can be a data scientist. We're seeing people being able to ask questions of the data in ways that they haven't been able to do in the past. And the end result is that the governmental process around budgeting, around public safety, around health services, around transport, and all of the other areas become a very easy process to manage and very relevant. The end goal from governments these days, when they look at open data, is bringing that data to the masses so that they can utilize either delivery of services or just publishing of the data so that the data can be used for key services or for select services. As I've been walking around the Expo and the Congress for the past 2 days, I've noticed a large number of people that are walking with their heads down. In fact, I've watched people actually walk into each other or bump into some of the kiosks as they're looking at their devices. And I'm always curious to see what people are doing when they're looking at their device and really deeply focused. Some people are on email, some people are looking, or some people are actually on the phone where they have a Bluetooth headset, but they're still looking at information on their phone. But a lot of times they're looking at maps, so they're planning out where they need to be for additional meetings, or where they're planning their meals later in the day, or they're checking in for their flights. And this role of mobility is actually taking a very strong pattern as more and more data becomes open from the types of services. The other thing I wanted to point out is the growth, or the explosion of open government participation around the world. There was a conference a couple of weeks ago in London called around the Open Government Partnership. And this is where countries from around the world that have signed obligations to be open in how they participate come together to have a Congress. They come together and they talk about the role of data and what people are doing with the data within the government sense. Now, this is a national perspective. These are countries that are participating. There are 59 countries today that have signed up in the Open Government Partnership. Logically, the cities and the municipalities within the government that work with the central governments are benefiting because there are programs that are actually rolling down from the central government that enable these types of processes. This becomes extremely important for the enablement of organizations because what ends up happening is local businesses, local interest groups can then capture that information and start to take advantage of opportunities to provide better support services for the citizens, for the workers, or for the people that are working, say, in the private sector in those particular cities. Now, one of the partners, they're actually here in the room today, is a company called Socrata. And the reason I point to Socrata is Socrata has been a company that actually has been built upon helping organizations utilize open government data. Now, it's not just in the utilization of the existing data sets, but it's the creation of the data sets. And they're an organization that is very interesting to me because what they've been able to do is become a trusted advisor in a lot of conversations with governments and help them as they go through their evolution in providing the appropriate data sets, collecting the right feedback for the types of services that should be available. Now, I should also say, Socrata is one of the main organizations in this particular space. There are others as well. There are organizations like CCAN in the open source space. There are local organizations. And the good thing is, most of the open government players and the open data players tend to work together in how they operate. The other reason this becomes important is as the data sets become available and the understanding of how the data can be utilized, new services start to evolve. We've seen some come from hackathons. In fact, I was living in Washington, D.C. when the first hackathon appeared in Washington, D.C. from a city perspective, where the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer in Washington, D.C., had issued a grant where they had accepted a grant for innovation, and they had used the money to then spark interest with open data sets. They published a request for citizens to build applications that could be deployed on mobile devices so that they could better enable a mobility strategy. This was back in 2008, late 2007, early 2008, when this process was occurring. And today, when you look back at the types of city services and you go to the city websites, there are a variety of different applications that are available that people can download and install. Most are free. There are some that have some fee if there's some other infrastructure that is able to benefit the cities. But we see a large presence in this capacity. The examples I have on the slide are from the city of New York. And the reason I use different examples is so that you understand what's happening, whether it's in the US from the cities I've just mentioned, or in Ottawa or Toronto. We've seen a lot of work in Canada, in London, obviously, in Manchester. And in Barcelona, we've seen a tremendous uptake, and I'll talk a little bit more about Barcelona. Because there is a partner that we work with every day. It's a company called BizSmart, and they're based here in Barcelona, and they do a lot of work around open government and enabling governments to take advantage of the data sets and look at analytic capabilities. Now, the beauty of their types of solutions are they're hooked into the existing systems that governments need to use in a private perspective, meaning private in the sense that there is identifiable information that needs to be managed by the data protection agencies. That data stays within the confines of government, and they can help the government then decide what data should be published externally. The end result of all of these processes is that there are portals and applications that are then developed and provided either to citizens from a citizen-facing perspective of the open data, and then there is a side that actually resides internally, behind the firewalls for governments to do what they do. The other thing that's interesting to me about the way BizSmart has set up their model is they're an organization that was focused in Spain on Barcelona, and they've begun to grow. And by working with organizations focused on open data and open government elsewhere around the world, they've begun to appear in many, many places. And what's happening is there is this smart city concept of exporting IP that's being created within the cities and shared with cities in other parts of the world. And to me, that's one of the big factors that I'm frequently requested from government leaders. They want to understand how they can better share how they're working in this type of capacity. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how we're looking at some of the open data capabilities. The role, and just so you're curious, the role that Microsoft plays in this space is we tend to participate with many of the governments around the world on the desktop, in the data center, with the infrastructure and the cloud capabilities. So we have a lot of the technology capabilities that already exist from an investment perspective in the cities. We're helping the cities take advantage of those investments, and open government and open data happens to be one of those. So with that, thank you.
Thanks so much, Joel, for that great overview of some of the issues that are involved in open data. We're excited now to be able to move to a speaker from a city, an actual city who's developing an open data initiative and who's working on a digitization project in which they're embedding Wi-Fi across the infrastructure of the city in order to, as part of this, to generate further data. And so Kim Spiegelberg will talk about his role in that. And interestingly, Kim actually used to be part of the planning department and has moved into this role as head of digitization as a moving up stack, if you will, in order to leverage the infrastructure, add a layer of digitization on top of it, and then create the tools to provide additional services using that data. So it's a great story. Looking forward to hearing the examples from Denmark.
Thank you. So. Yes, thank you very much for being here today. I come from the city of Copenhagen, and as you said, I have a background in urban planning. So when I talk about being a smart city and about open data, I think it's important to stress that we see it as a tool to improve the city, to improve the lives of all the citizens. And we have what we call the Copenhagen story, which is about, that's our overall goal for the city, to make it a livable city and a city with green growth, and to make it a city where you also have the CO2 neutrality by 2025. Today we have a lot of data sets produced within the municipality, and the data we use to make some services for the city, people who live in the city, for the citizens and the companies in the city. But you can ask yourself, is this the right way to do? Do we know all the needs that are out there? So, the future, we said we have created an open data portal where we put out all the data sets that we create in this city. At the moment, we've just started, so it's like 50 data sets at the moment, but every day there's coming more out there. And the idea is that then companies can use the data to make some services that fits the needs of the citizens. And as we see it, there's 3 winners in this process. There's the city or the municipality itself, because we don't have to produce all the services or the apps or the solutions. We just create the data, so we save a lot of time and money. And there's the companies who use the data, they're winners because they can make solutions, apps, whatever. Maybe they can make money out of them. And then again, there's the citizens and the users of Copenhagen, the companies that can benefit from these solutions. And all our data is there, and it's for free. That's a strategy we've chosen. Of course, you can sell data, but we have chosen to make them free for everybody. And the open data, we can use it to improve for 4 things. One is to improve our own decision making, get an overview of the city, make better planning, because the city of Copenhagen, we have like 7 directorates, And once you have the data available for everybody, it's easier to take decisions across different kind of sectors and make better decisions. We also want to use it to make innovation, creative inclusion, and to make a marketplace for the open data. And we use them to make partnerships with companies like big energy suppliers. And as the fourth thing, we want to support our political and strategic initiatives by using this data. And so in Copenhagen, we have started very small. At the moment, there's like 50 data sets, but our aim is big. We want all, if we can, all the data in the municipality to be on this open data portal so everybody can use it. But we think we start small with quick feedback loops, trying the data and see what we can get out of it. We have chosen to use CCAN, which is an open source, so it's free for us to use. It's also used by a lot of other cities who work with open data, so I don't know if it's a standard, but there's a lot of cities using it, and we can exchange ideas. And it's very good for us because it doesn't cost us anything, and it's constantly developed. In the beginning, we have chosen the first pilot we made was with parking data, because that's a big question in Copenhagen: how to find a parking space, where's the nearest, how much does it cost, how do you pay for it? So together with a small company, we developed an app, or developing an app about parking, finding a parking spot. And we're also making partnerships with some private companies who have parking. So it's for all the parking in the city, both for private and public parking. This is the website where you can get all the data sets, and just go in there and you search for them, and well, you use them for whatever you want. And we can also show it on a map. It's already displayed there, so you can see various types of data sets. And then again, this is one thing. And our next project that we're looking into at the moment to see what can be the next step, we have a project that we're calling Copenhagen Connecting. And this is a project about building a digital infrastructure in the city. I mean, now we have, during many years, we've built houses, roads, bridges, etc. Now we want to look at the digital infrastructure. And what we'd like to do is to connect all the city with a digital infrastructure, a wireless network that you can put in a lot of the equipment that we already have in the city. You could put it in the street lighting, in the street lights. And if you have this network, you will be able to, for example, because everybody have, or most people have a smartphone, they have the Wi-Fi on. So if you have this closed grid, you can triangulate how people is moving. And for example, you can use it to see there's a lot of bicycles coming. So we can make green lights, green waves for the bicycles so they can move easily through the city. You can do the same for cars or for trucks. You can put sensors up that is connected to the network, so you can monitor the pollution, the water. You can get data from the buildings to see how much energy do they use. You can, for example, put free Wi-Fi out for tourists. Could be very helpful since it can be expensive. And you can put sensors on all our equipment. I mean, we are a city with more than 500,000 people, so to service the city we have so much equipment, so there's a big business case in tracking this equipment and optimizing the use of it. And you could, for example, use it to make parking info in real time. You could put it all together into a control center like this, where you could have the overview of major events. You could make green lights for when there's ambulances on the road. And I mean, the number of the things you could do with this is legio. But at the moment, we're looking into the possibilities of it, because there's some money to be invested in a system like this. But we have made a business case, and the overall socio-economic advantages of this is like 4.4 billion Danish kroner per year. So it's a huge business case if you could go in this direction. But this is what we're looking into at the moment. But we hope we can make it come true in the near future. So thank you very much for your attention. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Kim. So we're going to move from Denmark, from Copenhagen, to Latin America. And Javier is going to share with us several examples from the MuNet initiative that's organized by the Organization of American States. So, Javier.
Buenos días, muchas gracias por la invitación. Aquí voy a presentar el programa MuNet de la OEA como una antesala al gobierno abierto y el caso de municipios MuNet con iniciativas Open Data. La Organización de Estados Americanos es la organización referente política del continente americano. Se dedica a promover la democracia, la paz, la seguridad multidimensional, la gobernabilidad democrática, entre otros temas. Y específicamente a través de la Secretaría de Asuntos Políticos impulsa un programa que es el programa MuNet de Gobierno. Este es un programa de modernización municipal que incorpora a los municipios a la sociedad del conocimiento y lo hace a través de estrategias de gobierno electrónico. Promueve este programa la transparencia, la eficiencia y la participación ciudadana, que son pilares de la gobernabilidad democrática. MuNet de Gobierno tuvo una fase piloto que se aplicó en 11 países de la región a razón de 2 municipios por país. A partir de los aprendizajes y de las lecciones aprendidas de esta iniciativa, luego se replicó en otros países como Bolivia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Panamá y Paraguay. Inicialmente se hizo con el apoyo de CAF, SIDA de Canadá y la OEA, y ahora estamos con nuevos aliados, especialmente con SIDA de Canadá. En cada país encontramos un aliado, por ejemplo, en Bolivia la ATSIP, la Agencia para la Sociedad de la Información de Bolivia, en Costa Rica la Secretaría Técnica de Gobierno Digital, Guatemala la Asociación de Municipios de Guatemala, en Panamá la Autoridad de Innovación Gubernamental y en Paraguay el Ministerio del Interior. Para tomar un ejemplo, aquí está cuando se firma el acuerdo con la Secretaría Técnica de Gobierno Digital, y para notar el apoyo político que ha recibido el programa en Costa Rica, pueden ver en la imagen a la presidenta de Costa Rica suscribiendo el acuerdo como testigo presencial. Aquí vemos, por ejemplo, el compromiso que asumen los alcaldes, en este caso los alcaldes de Panamá, donde comprometen sus esfuerzos a trabajar en el programa, a liderar el cambio. Es muy importante aquí la figura del alcalde, que estas iniciativas estén en la agenda del alcalde, en la agenda cotidiana del alcalde, y que sea consistente con los planes de desarrollo, el plan de gobierno y todas las actividades que se desarrollan en el municipio y por supuesto las políticas que se impulsan desde el nivel central. Otro de los compromisos es designar un equipo de proyecto, un equipo MuNet y un gerente MuNet, el apoyo institucional del programa y cumplir con un cronograma de actividades. Aquí también es importante que haya hitos claves y un cronograma que se respete para poder asegurar los objetivos. Dentro de los impactos que ha tenido el programa en la región, se han beneficiado 150 municipios, voy a decir algunos datos, 10.500 horas de consultoría dedicadas a los municipios, 21.000 horas de formación a funcionarios municipales, y hemos detectado un incremento en los presupuestos de TICs en los municipios del orden de los 382%. El marco metodológico de este programa es parte de un taller de estrategias de gobierno para los alcaldes, porque lo que nos interesa es ayudar a los alcaldes a construir una visión hacia la sociedad del conocimiento y a cómo aprovechar las oportunidades que ofrecen las tecnologías de la información y las comunicaciones y promover el liderazgo. Luego unos diagnósticos en TICs, transparencia, eficiencia y participación ciudadana para detectar las oportunidades de mejora, porque esas oportunidades de mejora van a permitir ser el input de la estrategia que se construya, pero para eso necesitamos que los funcionarios municipales estén formados. Entonces les damos 100 horas de formación con un curso líder en la región. Más de 6.000 funcionarios de América Latina y Caribe han tomado el curso de Introducción a las Estrategias de Gobierno Electrónico. Muchos de ellos han liderado en la región los programas de gobierno electrónico, por ejemplo el caso del gobierno de Colombia, que masivamente ha formado a través del curso de gobierno de la OEA a sus funcionarios. Más de 1000 funcionarios colombianos han tomado este curso y muchos premios que se observan en gobierno electrónico han sido alumnos de nuestros cursos. Luego se le aporta consultoría. Es importante en esto de la formación que lo que nos interesa es transferir el know-how a los equipos municipales, porque son ellos quienes tienen que construir las estrategias. Sería más fácil enviar un consultor y que hagas el trabajo, pero eso sería poco sustentable, con poca continuidad en el tiempo. Entonces, nuestra mayor expectativa es que se pueda transferir todo el know-how a los municipios y al país. Luego le aportamos consultoría para ayudarlos, para guiarlos en esa estrategia y herramientas que denominamos MuNet para un portal municipal, un portal de compras, un portal de servicios, portal de participación ciudadana, y ahora incorporamos una herramienta que es para seguridad ciudadana, para catástrofes y crimen. Ese es el componente de tecnología. Y por último, propiciamos la comunidad virtual para que se fomente la participación y la colaboración entre los municipios. Aquí vienen imágenes de estas 5 experiencias en Panamá, en Paraguay, Costa Rica, Guatemala y Bolivia. Así están los alcaldes. Quiero traer aquí el ejemplo de este camino de Open Data, por ejemplo, a través de Costa Rica. Costa Rica ha tenido, como les decía, un compromiso y liderazgo del máximo nivel. Esto es, desde la presidencia hasta las autoridades de la Secretaría Técnica de Gobierno Digital. Allí hay una champion, Alicia Bendaño, y hay una persona, Michael Porras, que lidera el tema Gobierno Abierto y Open Data. Y bueno, tienen funcionarios entrenados en nuestro curso de Gobierno Electrónico. Costa Rica ha superado todas las expectativas. Más del 90% de los funcionarios han superado este curso de Gobierno Electrónico. Han trabajado en la preparación tecnológica y este organismo, la Secretaría Técnica de Gobierno Digital, ha hecho un acuerdo con el sector privado para implementar Open Data con la empresa Junar. Esto ha iniciado el proceso en 5 municipios, la municipalidad de Mora, Pérez Celedón, Santa Ana, Alajuelita y Palmares. Aquí, por ejemplo, el caso de Pérez Celedón, donde muestra parte dedicadas para desarrolladores, para ubicación geográfica, el home de este espacio. Y bueno, consultando a los expertos de esta empresa del sector privado, ellos han tenido una buena definición de un programa holístico, un buen lanzamiento de la iniciativa con mucha visibilidad, buenas capacitaciones iniciales y generación de eventos para dar realce a los datos abiertos y su impacto potencial en la sociedad. Y bueno, como cosas a mejorar, mayor nivel de seguimiento, mayor nivel de apoyo, mayor soporte de tecnología en los municipios de escasos recursos. Otro caso que quiero traer aquí, que es un municipio que está iniciando el proceso, que es la municipalidad de Patzún, en Guatemala. También tiene un compromiso y liderazgo del máximo nivel. El alcalde y el alcalde anterior también se han dedicado fuertemente a impulsar al municipio, a la sociedad del conocimiento y al gobierno electrónico, y ahora están trabajando también en Open Data. Hay funcionarios entrenados, hay preparación tecnológica y están trabajando mucho en la alfabetización tecnológica de los ciudadanos. Han creado un centro comunitario digital y llevan ordenadores a distintos barrios, son aldeas. Para que ustedes tengan una idea, Patzún es un municipio pequeño, rural, con más del 95% de población indígena. Han logrado institucionalizar las TICs y hace poco, en la edición 2013, ganaron el premio de Ciudades Digitales en la categoría de Patrimonio. ¿Cómo lograron esa institucionalización de las TICs? Lograron incluir esto en la agenda del Consejo Municipal. Aprobaron en octubre de este año el programa de tecnologías de información y comunicación, que comprende una comisión TIC en el Consejo Municipal. Sitúense esto en un municipio rural, mayor porcentaje indígena. Realmente es un logro importante esto, que el Consejo Municipal tenga una comisión TIC, una estrategia de gobierno electrónico y gobierno abierto para reducción de brecha digital, normas y uso de los servicios electrónicos municipales, uso de software libre, portal web, canal de videos en YouTube, página de Facebook, canal de fotografías en Picasa, tableros de Pinterest, internet inalámbrico en el parque municipal, servidor propio, community manager. Todo esto forma parte de ese programa TICS que aprobó el Consejo Municipal. Aquí tienen, por ejemplo, el portal, más de 1.700 seguidores en Facebook, más de 1.000 videos en YouTube donde muestran la vida social y política. Ahí muestran, por ejemplo, eventos de rendición de cuentas, de cosas importantes que ocurren en la comunidad, los tableros de Pinterest y más de 5.000 fotos en Picasa. Han hecho una apropiación significativa de la tecnología. Estas políticas de datos abiertos benefician a los ciudadanos, pero también al propio gobierno. Fortalecen la transparencia, la rendición de cuentas y la modernización. Con la inteligencia colectiva se crean nuevos campos de aplicación y de significados, porque en la medida que se brinden esos datos a la comunidad, va a haber, por ejemplo, mayor transparencia, mayor innovación y mayor desarrollo cuando esos datos se crucen, por ejemplo, con datos del sector privado o del sector académico. Entonces, finalmente, todo esto aporta a la democracia y a la calidad de vida de los ciudadanos. Y para finalizar, quería traer una frase de Arquímedes de Siracusa del siglo III a.C. Dice, dadme un punto de apoyo y moveré el mundo. Podría decir un joven de un hackathon del siglo XXI, dadme datos abiertos y moveré el mundo. Allí hay una foto de un hackathon ocurrido en Buenos Aires en el 2013. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Javier, for the perspective on Latin America. It's interesting to hear about the efforts to engage the governments and what it takes to get those initiatives moving. Can I introduce you?
To know how it works, yeah.
So Raúl is actually going to speak. So Kim spoke earlier on digitizing the city and putting the infrastructure in place in order to create some of this data. Now Raúl is going to share with us from a telecom perspective their activities in actually making services, creating services out of that data that's being produced. So going beyond the creation of the data to develop those innovative new services.
Okay, thank you very much for your assistance here. And I'm Raúl González. I'm the responsible from Abertis Telecom about the development of smart city solutions and services. Our company is based on infrastructure and how to manage infrastructure and share this infrastructure between different people and companies. Okay. 20 years ago, citizens watched the color TV, but the access to public data was very limited. 5 years ago, citizens interact with the TV and the public administrations talk about open data. Nowadays, open data is a must for the public administration and an important part of the smart city projects, like we can see the previous people. Okay, but citizens consume digital content anytime, anywhere, when they want, using different devices, generating their own content and managing the distribution by them. That means that it's necessary to reduce the difference between the speed of the society and the public administration. In order to reduce this gap means what we call data re-evolution. It's a mix or join the power of open data and the power of open the municipal infrastructures. That's the base of ICT project. It's a project where the cities not only open the information that they generate with their infrastructure, they open some parts of the infrastructure in order to improve the interaction between the citizen and the city. Elements like this one, I will show you. Oh, sorry, what is it? Oh, here. This one makes possible to interact with some elements that I have near me. For example, with that element, I they know that who am I, or someone know who am I, that I have a handicap, for example, and when I arrive to some place, I push a button, recognize me, knows where I am, and the infrastructure open one door, change the configuration of some elevator or something like that. Okay, it's the new paradigm we think when we can interact with your environment in order to generate new services. And that facilitates the population, the successful of new services for the citizens, where the citizens can customize and personalize the city like they want, if we want to see like this. In a city, we do that. We merge these kind of services. We provide the tools for the public administration in order to manage who can access at any time, at any infrastructure, limit the access in order to assure that the public service that they normally use for give the service that they have, it works okay with any kind of problem. And we open to the different actors that we can find in a city. We merge public and private infrastructures. We merge public and private data, and we introduce the information that comes from the citizens. This information is in the city. We have a municipal network that it's prepared to recognize any kind of source of information, and with what we call a smart brain, it's the element that facilitate, share the information, share the infrastructure, access to the data, and new business models. This information and this infrastructure, it could be used by all the players that we can find in a city. Citizens, by different ways, directly accessing to the portals that public administration have, open data portals, these kind of things for the city management. It was one of the topics that the previous speakers have talked about. And why not public companies? And why not developers? The people that a lot of times knows exactly what the people want, and they can build new business models around that use of open infrastructures and data. I think that it's a re-evolution about data. It's share the public infrastructure plus share the data and come back this information to the system. It's a very complicated step because it's necessary to assure that the normal activity of the public administrations don't lose the quality of the service, but at the same time democratize, makes easier the access to the resources of the city. The benefits are participation, increase the participation. 5 weeks ago, I make some questions to an audience on how many people are using open data, and it was citizens, and they said to me that no one knows about any. What are you talking about? Open data? I don't use it. I don't know where to find, and it's necessary to find new ways that the people use that open data and use the infrastructures that we have in the city and facilitate this access. And we think that when we combine with infrastructures, we facilitate this participation from the part of the citizens. Obviously improve the transparency. One important and very important thing is share the knowledge. I see the knowledge between citizens and cities, companies, small, medium enterprise, and all the players that we have normally in a city, and improve the interaction between city and the managers, social connections, in the slide that we saw, the previous slide, around that smart brain, we have built several communities of developers with different interests, and they produce new applications that, in any case, any people from the municipalities thought that it was useful for the people, and they are the support of that business model. Okay, 20 hours access to the city applications, data and value of information, social integration. Basically, anyone can access to that infrastructure, depending on the terminal that they have or the elements that they have. They need to be part of the city. New relationships and business model, and obviously do-it-yourself service customized by and for the citizens. I think that that's one of the key elements to be success in that area. Thank you very much. That's all.
I would actually argue that everyone uses open data. I mean, how many of us checked the weather before we came to Barcelona, or how many of us have exactly? How many of us used a map to get out here, or to check where our taxi is going, or to find our way somewhere? I think that the key is actually getting the data out there and having it used in applications and services that we all need. So thank you for sharing that with us. Our next speaker actually brings a completely different perspective, maybe not completely, but a different perspective, looking not just at what we think of as open data, data that's been published and generated by governments, but looking at more broadly at public data and pulling data from a variety of sources on enterprises. Chris Taggart is going to talk to us about Open Corporates, which is the largest database of company information, which is looking to turn that industry upside down. And so we're eager to hear about that. Thank you.
My background's actually, well, I was originally a journalist, and whilst this is loading up, hopefully it will allow us to do this. I got my start in open data about 5 years ago with local data, so this is like coming home to me in a way. I'm wondering if I should just, let's see if I can get this going. I think this computer has crashed. Do you want me to use mine? Oh, wait. Wait.
So while we're waiting for this, actually, do we have any questions from the audience? And we can start with questions and then come back to the last presentation. How do we do the questions? Yeah? Absolutely. So
how do you deal with that dual use problem?
right. So the question was around privacy and security, or security, I guess. Privacy I threw in there myself. So that was one of the things that we actually wanted to discuss. I mean, we were talking a lot about the benefits, and there are a couple of issues that are kind of the gotchas and that come up as constraints to the whole open data movement. One is the privacy and security concern. Do you want to cover that, or should we?
I don't mind either way.
Does anyone want to chime in on that? Okay.
I can just say that in the city of Copenhagen, of course, it's only non-personal data that we put on the data portal. We are not allowed to put the personal data. So you can never relate it to a specific person, the data that we have there.
Yeah, well, I'm concerned about the oil refinery.
Please wait for the microphone.
Sí, comentar que hay además un marco de actuación que es la Ley de Acceso a la Información Pública y la Ley de Protección de Datos Personales. Esos dos marcos son un marco de actuación que si hay que revisar, bueno, se revisará, pero por lo pronto la Ley de Información, de Acceso a la Información Pública y de Protección de Datos Personales es un marco de actuación para una iniciativa.
Can I actually just make one? So let me just chime in and give a little perspective from our side. So protection of data, we think the technologies exist to handle that today. Typically, the conversations that will occur have to do with, and it's not always in this order, but it's around four things. It's around the law, it's around the policies, and the reason I say that is sometimes the law will enable it, but there are policies that prevent certain things from happening. The third is risk. So what is the risk and how do you manage that risk? And the fourth is typically politics. Now, in any given political season, politics may be number one, but in order for an organization to effectively secure their information, they have to understand typically those factors. They also need to understand how to compartmentalize that information. And that's where I say the technologies exist to do that. But a lot of times we'll see organizations that will do things like they'll look at information that is what they consider to be low business impact if the information were to get outside of the organization. There's another series that may be a medium business impact, and there may be a high business impact. The information will be treated differently, it'll be allowed to be used by different users, and it will be allowed to be put onto different types of devices that are managed by the IT organizations or not managed by the IT organizations, depending upon the complexity or the importance of that data. So the good thing is the capabilities exist. It really comes down to a governance model. And organizations like or events like these are excellent places for sharing to occur. And I've seen a lot of conversations. I've been in side meetings myself, and these are the exact types of conversations that we always want to help encourage and facilitate. The other thing is you want to share that information. And so it's not just at the event, but it's after the event. And how do you continue that dialogue in a global fashion? How do we learn from each other as we go throughout that process?
I'm not sure whether the fourth, your politics included perception, but that was one that I would add to it as well. Often there's a greater perception of risk and privacy concerns than there is reality. Are we close?
Just to respond to your question earlier about security more of infrastructure or things by releasing data. That's a very, I work in the open data field and I work with a lot of governments, so I'll keep the answer short so Chris can start talking, but it's a big fallacy to think that keeping information secret makes the system safer. Back in the day, you used to have locksmiths, and when they started first publishing the designs of locks, locksmiths were up in arms. They were saying that by publishing the design of locks, you were going to make locks more easier to pick and easier to break. And in reality, what happens is by publishing the design, more people comment on the flaws in the design, more people point out weaknesses in the design, and ends up making the system a lot more robust. And it's the same philosophy that's applied to Wikipedia or open source platforms like CCAN. By making your design for the oil refinery open and publicly available to everybody, it actually makes it a lot safer because you'll receive comments from security experts, from oil refinery experts, from all sorts of different people. Then the person who wants to do something nefarious with your oil refinery, he's going to find a way to figure out the weak spots anyways. So hiding the plans does not make the oil refinery safe. It's a big fallacy, one that's very common and that I hear a lot from governments, but it's completely untrue. You're much safer to make the entire plans and the entire information public so that people can comment and point out weaknesses.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next speaker. Chris, go ahead.
Not using your own laptop. And I want to talk to you a bit about, because this session is in part about successes, what things are working, where new things are happening, and where the opportunities are. I want to talk about open corporates, which I started 3 years ago now. We call it we don't call it, it is the largest open database of companies in the world, largest openly licensed database of companies in the world. We've got a really simple goal, but it's a significant one. It's quite a large goal. We want an entry for every single company in the world in an openly licensed database. And by company, we mean legal entity, not Microsoft, but all those, the Incs, the LLCs, the limited companies, the SAs, the SARLs that make up Microsoft. Because that's really that's the truth, if you like, of the corporate world, is on the legal entity level, on the company level. We started 3 years ago, a little under 3 years ago, with 3 million companies. We've since grown to over 60 million. And why is this useful? Well, for a start, when you have all these companies, you can come up with an ID system. And more than that, we came up with an ID system in which we have no intellectual property, which is entirely open. It allows you to do things like search multiple jurisdictions. If you're a journalist and a US journalist and you want to search the states and you don't know which part of the US it's in, then you have to go to 50-odd different registers in each of the states and provinces. To be able to search, you don't know whether it's a Luxembourg company, it's an SARL, it's a Luxembourg company or Spanish company or so on. Just being able to search quickly and easily without having to go to each of the individual registers is transformative, and I can explain, and I can say as a former journalist, whether you do stories or not depends on how much time it takes to research. You can start adding other information to it. We're adding addresses, filings, websites, things like trademark information from the WIPO database, government spending, official notices, health and safety violations, data from things like the Securities Exchange Commission, allows you to do reverse lookups for different identifiers. It allows you to do what's known as reconciliation, which is mapping names of companies to the actual companies themselves. Now, company names are a really terrible way of identifying it, and if anyone's here from the government, and they will have lots of government databases that have got company names in. Now, it may be to do with their procurement databases, it may be to do with the licenses that they've issued, it may be to do with the companies that they've cited or taken to court. And usually they will have names of the companies in there, but names are a really bad identifier. Not only are there different ways of referring to companies with a given name, different abbreviations that can be used, but also companies change names, quite frequently sometimes. And finally, companies reuse names. In the UK, Tesco Mobile Limited today, which is the mobile phone part of Tesco, the second biggest retailer in the world. Tesco Mobile Limited today is a completely different company with different ownership than Tesco Mobile Limited in 2003. So matching names together is really critical if you want to understand your own data, and government should want to understand its own data. And so we make all this available on a platform. We've now got, actually it's over 1,000 registered users of the API using this data from open data projects. We also have banks are heavily users of open corporates as well. And it allows people to do cool things. This is a mapping of different companies, looking at how they're connected with directors. And this was something that was done by a data journalist that I think we'll probably incorporate into open corporates. And that's by just making it available as open data. We allow global searches of officers, of directors. And so you can see where the names appear again and again, and similar references to it. Again, incredibly useful, whether you're the police, a tax office, a journalist, or someone doing business with a company. We're now tackling corporate structures, which companies own other companies. And I should say that all the data that we get from an open corpus, all of it is public data. It's all public data. It's just that it's siloed public data. This government has some. This government has another one, a bit. This agency has some. Another agency has some. And so what Open Corporates does with all of its data is to break down those silos and to allow everybody to have a 360-degree view, if you like, of a company. So the company structures, it's probably the most valuable company database in the world. It's what we need to understand a company. If you're a government, who are you really doing business with? Is it someone that are you giving a health and safety contract to someone you've just given a health and safety violation to in another part of government? Are you doing business with 5 different companies that are all part of the same group and that you can do a better deal if you knew that? From political influence and lobbying, donations, tax, this is just the single most critical data set for everyone. The proprietary data sets, proprietary versions of this are incredibly problematic. They're expensive. They've got large gaps. They use proprietary identifiers. They have restrictive licenses. And more than anything else, the biggest problem at all is that they're opaque. And what we mean by that is they don't tell you where they got the information from and when you got it. It gives you no context on which to base your decisions. And it gives you no way of checking whether it is accurate. So what we're doing is we're taking this and looking at this from an open data perspective. This is actually an animation of, you can do this on your site, run this on the site yourself. This is of a New Zealand public corporation and how it's connected to the various parts and the various shareholders. So we're taking it from different sources. We're taking it from, initially we've taken it from 3 sources, although we've now increased that somewhat. We took it, for example, from New Zealand. The company register in New Zealand has detailed shareholding data that's publicly available, that's free, and that's open. We're taking it from the Federal Reserve, who have a database of banks and a bank ownership, and we're taking it from the US Securities and Exchange Commission, and now we're starting to look at crowdsourcing. You can find new insights with doing this data. This is IBM. The big star is the information that's from the Securities and Exchange Commission, their filings from the Securities and Exchange Commission. On the left is the information that isn't in the Securities and Exchange Commission, but is on the New Zealand company register. This is from the Federal Reserve's own data set, and this is not to knock the Federal Reserve. They're actually doing some great stuff, and we've got good relationships with them. But by doing this, we're starting to find problems with their data. This company doesn't exist. It's not a Luxembourg company. There's 2 problems. One is that there's a spelling mistake in it, and the second is actually it's a Cayman Islands company. Now, if you're regulating a bank or doing business with it, it makes a big difference whether it's a Cayman Islands company or a Luxembourg company. These are some views of financial companies. Barclays. This is Morgan Stanley. You start to find some interesting things. This is actually a key part of Morgan Stanley, but it's an unlimited company, which means it has lower reporting requirements than if it was a limited company. And finally, we're playing around with crowdsourcing. We've got an alpha testing program on crowdsourcing. And the reason why this is important is exemplified by Facebook, which we did as one of the first examples of this crowdsourcing, investigating Facebook and Facebook's corporate structure. So we looked at the SEC filings, and the SEC filings are just plain text. They're not data, they're plain text. And we sent our bots in to look at those and turn those into data, and we get six different subsidiaries. Only 2 of which are called Facebook, have got Facebook in the name. And then we started investigating a couple of these in detail, specifically 2 Irish companies. And we looked at those Irish companies and said, let's take all the publicly available data about those Irish companies that we can. And this is what we found. We found that actually they weren't owned directly by Facebook Inc. Facebook Ireland Limited is owned by Facebook Ireland Holdings. Edge Network Services Limited is actually owned also by a Facebook Ireland Holdings company with an intermediate company called Random Us Investments Limited, which is probably someone's idea of a joke. And then it goes up to Facebook with these strange things where you have 999 shares owned by one company and 1 owned by a Cayman Islands company. And so that's really what the reality is. And bear in mind that Facebook is the company that thinks that what matters about you is not your social security number and your birth name and so on. It's your interactions, all those little details that make you who you are, who your friends are, how often you interact with them, what films you liked, what songs you've listened to, and so on. And so what we're doing here is, in a sense, looking at Facebook from that same lens through which they look at you. And what we're doing with this as well is, as we think by doing this, not only do we get higher quality data, and we have a number of people using our data, and we're talking with a lot of government agencies about doing this. We have some of the data, traditional business information providers buying our data. But by making this public, making this open, making this reusable, you get higher quality data, you solve many of those problems about knowing who you're doing business with. And also you move it from being a black box model about being the only people who've got access to this to being one that's based on value added. And we think that's one of the critical things, is that in order to make the open data world work, we need sustainable models, and open data encourages value added models as opposed to rent seeking business models. And I think that's fundamentally where one of the benefits of open data. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. It's a great example of pulling open data together from a variety of different sources, making it available, adding value to it, and then, in a sense, providing that back to the government as well. As you said, there are several government customers that are potentially interested. So we do have maybe a little bit of time to open up to questions, even though I think we're running late as a session, but we started a little late. So if there are additional questions, I'm happy to field them. If not, we have one question that we had talked about before coming up on stage. There were two, actually. There was one around privacy and security that was a potential downside to open data. The second one was the question around sustainability and potential monetization of the data. Sustainability from both perspectives. Are the governments who are opening their data sets, are they going to be able to maintain that and continue to sustain that effort around openness? Or on the end user side, what are the business models that are in place or that can be adopted in order to sustain the applications and services that are being created using the data? So I'd love to open up to the panel to see if there are any comments there.
Yeah.
You have ideas on that.
Yeah, so I always have comments in this space. I think from the perspective of the sustainability side, we have conversations every day with organizations that are looking to e-enable systems. In fact, a lot of government organizations, 8-10 years ago, really went down the path of providing some sort of e-government capabilities. And what we've run into is situations where there's so much cost involved in keeping the electronic versions of the systems running, with the expectation 10 years ago that most people would be using those systems, that for people that still don't have access via some digital divide or digital inclusion issues, they're not able to access those types of services. So they still need to go to a government service center or a kiosk in a specific location. And so the costs haven't been able to drop on the non-digital side as much as I think a lot of governments had expected, or at least in certain parts of the world. So the sustainability or the ability to sustain the systems is a critical requirement in today's world. The good thing is it's an issue that people are aware of and they're thinking it through. On the other part of the question around the monetization, I frequently am asked by government organizations what expectations we're hearing from citizens and from private industry in the usage of a lot of the open government data sets. And we're seeing a lot of very interesting models where organizations are looking at whether they can monetize some sort of system or deliver some service on the open government models. Most of them today, that at least the ones that I've come across, are in some sort of pilot mode, and they'll vary from many different types of applications. But the reality is, or the question will come down to is, who's benefiting from the monetization? Is it something that it's a commercial entity? Is it something where the government can enter into some sort of public-private partnership? And there are a lot of interests in going down that path, and there are conversations that are occurring as to whether there is some option. And I think there is a delicate balance between what open data is and people feeling like the opening of that data, even if it is de-identified data or aggregated data with no identification capabilities, people don't want to feel like the information about them is being sold for some commercial benefit. So it'll be very interesting to see where the path continues in that particular space.
Yep. No.
I mean, I think I've been in the private sector all my life, and I've been running companies for quite a while now. And I think we have to be, and you see when you're running a company, the temptations, you fundamentally always want to game the system. I mean, that's one of the, it's a question of, well, how can I take this set of rules or this, the business environment here and somehow make it work for me and make it work for me better, for my company better than the other companies. I mean, that's the whole point in some respects. And I think that, companies are very good at doing that. That's what they're invented for. That's in their DNA. And I think you have to be very careful before when you're talking about monetizing it and so on. And I think there are a number of risks. And I think you tackle these by having some core principles. But I think there are a number of risks. For example, charging for the data, if it's an important data set, is easy. But what you're doing with that is actually you are restricting access. That is what charging for the data means. When somebody pays for that data, they're doing it, and they're getting that data that somebody who isn't paying for it won't get. If, for example, the government of Belgium charges 100,000 to sell its company database and only has 5 suppliers, those 5 buyers, those 5 buyers aren't doing it because they feel sorry for the government, aren't giving 100,000 euros each. Because they feel sorry for the Belgian government and want to help subsidize the poor people of Belgium. They're doing it because actually it works for them. They've got business models that works from it, and it's a barrier to entry to other people. And so I think that you need to be really careful about that, particularly when you're talking about those sorts of areas where fundamentally there's a monopoly. And if you've got a monopoly on this data or the ability to collect this data, then monetizing it is trivial. And you really need to think about those aspects. The other thing is that when you're also thinking about some of those value-added ones, then again, if it's a question of privileged access, you need to be careful that you're not essentially being co-opted as being a data collector using statutory powers for the private sector as well. So I think there are lots of difficult issues, lots of difficult areas, and I think fundamentally you get the principles right, and then you look at each case on its merits based on those principles.
I think the bottom line is that there's a balancing act. All right, with that, we're going to wrap up. Thanks, everyone. Sorry that we ran over a little bit, but we started late. Thanks.